In today's video, are powerlifters always injured?
By myself.
Hey guys, what's going on? This is Powerlifters from ProPhysique.com, and we have another guest, my man Steve Beaugrand, Science with Steve, the master of exercise science. That's right. And today's discussion, we're going to discuss an article that came out in Mass, the monthly application of strength sport, which I know I did one yesterday, but I thought it'd be cool to let Steve review one himself. And if you're interested in more of his shenanigans, you can go to his channel below and check out what he's up to. But today's article is very relatable to us because we've both competed in powerlifting. Yeah. We've both had plenty of injuries, and we both are associated with a lot of people that we either coach or are friends with that are dealing with the sport of powerlifting and the consequences of lifting at a high frequency, at a high intensity. Yeah. So why don't you summarize the article from Mass that was written by Eric Helms, correct?
Eric Helms.
So let's talk about it.
So somebody much smarter than me. So the article essentially was looking at powerlifters over in Europe, looking at sub-elite level powerlifters. So, you know, probably closer to my level. I don't know, maybe your level, you might have been a little bit higher than that, I don't know. So
definitely not elite, but so you're saying the people, not the people that are top 5 in the world, right, but people that are actually getting decent Wilks scores.
Yes, so the males were in the 300s, you know, so getting closer to that 400 Wilks, females a little bit lower. And so what they were looking at was injury rates within the group of powerlifters. Not only the injury rates, but kind of where those injuries were happening and what those specific injury sites were, you know, trying to associate them with. So a lot of correlation in this study, not any kind of causation. So we can definitely see a lot of trends in terms of how they sort of defined what an injury was, because they changed the normal definition of an injury from something that stops training, so it's no longer being defined as a cessation, but something that gets in the way of training. So say, hey, maybe I pull with a mixed grip, right? I get some bicep tendonitis because I've been deadlifting a lot in a peaking block. I now have to put down any kind of auxiliary or accessory work in terms of biceps. That would now be considered an injury for this study.
Well, so that kind of changes things, because when I think of an injury when it comes to powerlifting, it would be something like when I had a hip strain where I literally couldn't squat, or I had knee tendonitis where I literally could not even do a leg extension. I think bodybuilders as a whole, whenever we have what they're describing as an injury, we just describe it as a tweak that we got to work around for a couple weeks. You find ways to get your volume in without continuing to injure. The difference with powerlifting is that it's so specific.
Right.
You can't go to a meet and be like, well, I've got tendonitis, can I do a leg press instead of a squat?
Right.
No, you still have to squat, bench, and deadlift. So at least when I was powerlifting, what I found was instead of either altering the training or changing it up, I would foam roll, take a pain reliever, put on some Flexol. Like, you continue to train, you just try to eliminate the pain during the session or after.
Yeah. And so, whereas I think that is a very normal thing to do, I think that can also be a very dangerous thing to do. A lot of what we see in terms of foam rolling, in particular, is that it actually just sort of numbs the pain response. And so we become a little bit number and deader to that pain response, which is something that is important. Like, there's a reason that our body is telling us that we're in pain.
That's the one big takeaway I had from powerlifting for 2 years, and I did 5 meets, and the one big takeaway I have is I haven't powerlifted now, done a meet for 2 years, and I've never felt better. I just started to accept that pain was a part of it, and that I was trying not to be a little bitch. But it kind of took some of my joy away, because I was not able to just do some simple functional things like squat down on the floor with my family or go to the gym and do a bench press anymore.
Right.
So in this review, did they find that there was a higher amount of injury amongst powerlifters, or is it similar across all strength sport, adventures?
Right. So my expectation is that it would most definitely be pretty similar across all strength sports. Now, the reason we have a hard time saying that for sure is because this study only looked at powerlifters, and it's one of the first studies that I've seen that changed the definition of changed your training, like caused a hindrance in your training versus caused a cessation of training. But I would say, in my experience, I think that having something that changes your training in general is pretty pretty common in terms of any strength.
Yeah, and I would not consider that an injury. What I consider an injury is something like what happened to my buddy Lane, where he literally has not been able to squat or deadlift for the greater part of the last couple of years.
Right.
He's had a few successful training cycles, but when you get something like an injury to your back that is constantly kind of re-aggravated every time you just do something slightly wrong, whereas for years it was never an issue, that's where it begins to concern me, like long-term health and well-being.
Right.
So for my own best interests, I am a terrible squatter, not only from strength, but my leverages and my movement patterns. It just took me a while to accept the fact that, I'm never going to squat 500 pounds, and I'm never especially going to do it pain-free, just because. So when I look at injury prevention with my lifters, what I look for is the efficiency of the movement. Did they talk about efficiency at all?
They did not talk about efficiency of the movement because this was a questionnaire-based study.
Okay.
However, we did see that most men had more lumbopelvic injuries than women. So women tended to have more up in the upper part of the spine, right? So neck injuries, whereas men definitely had a lot in the lower back, in the hip area.
And that could just be simply from different leverages from being taller.
Absolutely could be.
Like the upper body is just, for me at 6'3", the difficulty becomes with the bar on my back and the hip hinge. There's a long lever arm there.
Right.
It's just very difficult to stay upright. Whereas I find that shorter lifters tend to be more efficient, more like a piston.
Right.
And so the less movement you have in a lift, the less likelihood I would suggest that there is for injury.
Yes. I would also suggest that in my experience with clients that I've worked with, males tend to be a little bit more, I know what I'm doing, I'm going to power through it, whereas my female clients are much more focused on proper form and lifting mechanics.
That's also true of bodybuilding. I have a lot of people say, well, why do the girls have such great shoulders? And I say, well, because when they do side lateral raises and dumbbell presses, they're not worried about how much weight they're doing. They're actually worried about activation. So the same could be said for powerlifting. Girls are going to focus less on, I have 200 kilos on the bar, more on their technique.
Right.
So that's an excellent observation. So what were the big takeaways from the study? Because the thing I love about mass, and if you guys are interested in mass, you can click the link below and get a subscription. But mass, they also do at the end of the article a going forward bit. They want to say, okay, this was interesting. Here's what we would like to see going forward. So what did they mention?
So the big thing that he mentioned was, creating studies that are going to have a lot more control within the groups, right? So looking at a group where you don't make any changes to their training frequency, or what they're doing, and then groups where you do. Now, the viability of this, and Eric obviously mentioned this as well, is very low because you would have to have a lot of competitive power lifters giving up a lot of control over their training regimens, and then focusing on, okay, what kind of injury rates do we have? Where are these injuries happening? How are they happening between the sexes? And so this is one of the shortcomings of research is that, we live in a free society and people, I know.
People always read a research and like, oh, why didn't they do this? Why didn't they do that? When you actually start getting into the nuts and bolts of getting a research review done between the internet, the review boards that have to approve the study, getting people to participate, getting people to be in the lab. Like, you don't understand, like someone has to be there with those people at all hours. Right. So there's a lot of moving pieces when it comes to getting research done. So every little bit we get is just another step forward.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. A lot of research is not necessarily what is optimal. It's, figuring out what do we know now works, not as well.
Right.
What's less optimal.
So I guess Stephen and I would kind of concur that there's probably not a higher injury rate among powerlifters, but I might say this. In my experience across years of being associated with powerlifting, the injuries can tend to be a little bit more severe. Because once you get hurt, it's not typical that you stop training.
Right.
Instead of listening to our bodies with the injuries, with tendonitis, we are trying to continue to train through the pain. But I digress. What do you guys think? Comment below. Are powerlifters more likely to get hurt? Thanks, Stephen.
All right.
Be sure to subscribe to his channel below, and I will talk to you guys tomorrow.